Good to be here today. I appreciated the words of encouragement this morning that encouraged us to pause and listen for God. This is a lost art, I think, this whole concept of listening. It's been said that we were given one mouth and 2 ears. That means we're just listen twice as often as we speak. Something we all need to practice more and more, don't we? You know, these days, there's a Guinness record for just about everything. In the Guinness Book of Records, you can find such interesting facts, such as the world's smallest cow, or the world's heaviest gooseberry, or even who owns the world's largest collection of Smurf memorabilia. But one record that you might be interested in is who holds the record for the world's loudest shout. Now, this unique honor belongs to a primary school teacher in Belfast, Ireland, a teacher named Annalisa Flanagan. Now, Annalisa always knew that she had a loud voice, but she never really knew the extent of how loud it was. And after some prompting from family and friends, she decided to enter a city bus shouting contest to flaunt her skills. It was here that she discovered just how loud she was. In fact, she broke the world record, reaching an impressive 121.7 decibels. A noise comparable to a jet engine or a rock concert. Ironically, the word that she shouted to gain her world record, quiet. Being able to shout the loudest. For Annalisa, it's a world record. But for the rest of the world, it just seems to be a way of life. In our lives today, with all that is going on around us, all we see and all we experience is people shouting over each other. Look at the news. Look at social media. Look anywhere, for that matter. And practically the only thing that we see is arguing and fighting. Shouting matches that are cleverly being hidden behind passive-aggressive memes and posts. Is there a difference between yelling the loudest and having something to say? And more importantly, is shouting down everyone else the right attitude to have? Well, it depends on who you ask, especially in our society today. There's a new study that suggests being confident and loud is the best way to win an argument, even if you're wrong. Researchers from Washington State University drew this conclusion after studying an activity of Twitter users. The more opinionated they were, the more influential and trustworthy they were perceived to be. They analyzed more than 1 billion tweets posted during various American sporting events, including the Super Bowl, to test whether being accurate or being confident made Twitter users more popular. Accuracy versus confidence. Despite professional pundits and amateur fans both making a similar amount of correct and incorrect predictions, the tweeters who yelled, quote, yelled louder, were seen as more trustworthy and had more followers. Whoever yells the loudest has to be right. Is that all there is to life? Followers on Twitter, likes on Facebook, biting comments, anger, frustration, unfollowing people because they believe differently than we do? Where's the love? Where is the compassion anymore? Does humility exist? And if so, where can it be found? We talked a couple weeks ago, and I want to remind us of this. Elijah goes before God, and God says, go stand on the mountain, and I'm going to pass by you. And you remember what happened. God passed by several times. Earthquake, a fire, rushing wind, loud sounds, big activity. And each time it said God wasn't in the big activity. Intimidating things, and each time God was not in that. And it wasn't until there was a soft, gentle whisper that went by, which contained God's presence. You see, I believe that God is really, really into humility. I believe that it is a character trait that unfortunately is harder and harder to come by in our generation. We must work on it. We must learn to listen. Why? Because it doesn't come naturally. It's more natural to yell and scream. It's more natural to fight for what we believe in. Humility. Remember the comedian Yakov Smirnoff? When he first came to the United States from Russia, he was not prepared for the incredible variety of instant products available in the American grocery store. He says that on my first trip to a grocery store, I saw powdered milk. You just add water, suddenly you get milk. He said, then I saw powdered orange juice. And you add water and you get orange juice. He said, and then I saw baby powder. And I thought to myself, what a country. To some extent, we're all guilty of this, right? We make these assumptions about Christianity and about our faith that people change instantly at salvation. Aren't we surprised, honestly, when we go through hard times or have temptations? Don't we think, God, why is this happening to me? I don't understand this. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. Why is it still tough? I think that there's a lot of Christians that expect some kind of quick fix to sin and to difficulty in their life. Now, according to this belief, when someone gives his or her life to Christ, there's an immediate, substantive, in-depth, miraculous change in habits, attitudes, and characters. We go to church as if we're going to the grocery store. Powdered Christian. Just add holy water and disciples are born. Not made. Unfortunately, there is no such powder, and disciples of Jesus Christ are not instantly born. They are slowly raised through many trials, sufferings, and temptations. Amen. You know, a study has found that only 11% of church-going teenagers have a well-developed faith, rising to only about 32% for church-going adults. Why? Because true life only begins at salvation. It takes more than that. It takes time. It takes training, trying, suffering, and yes, even dying. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and he said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's." Peter took Jesus aside and rebuked him. Why? Well, it's understandable. Peter believed that the kingdom of God could be obtained instantly by force. Yelling louder than everyone else. Being more forceful, rushing wind, and earthquake kind of God is what Peter is hoping for. You see, Peter has a worldly view of the kingdom, and Jesus has a heavenly view of his kingdom. For a moment, I'd like for you to listen to this story with new ears and see Jesus through the eyes of Peter and the rest of the disciples. Get rid of all your notions of who Jesus is for a moment. Take away from your mind Jesus as the Son of God. Strip from your memory that he died on the cross and that he died for and all that he did for your sins. Forget that Jesus ever said things like, love your enemy, love your neighbors. Now, for a moment, think of Jesus only as a military leader, someone like Norman Schwarzkopf. Imagine that your country has been invaded and is being ruled by godless men. Sense now that the tension is mounting and you are about to go to battle. You're about to conduct a coup d'etat, that you and this band of ruffians that are going to attempt to overthrow this government by a sudden, violent strike. You know the odds are stacked up against you, but you have a very strong belief that God is on your side despite the overwhelming odds. Now you're thinking like Peter. You see, Jesus comes before his disciples and lays out his military strategy. Verse 31, Jesus basically says, we're going to march into Jerusalem, and your general will suffer many things. We are not going to get any help from our Jewish brothers or the elders. Even the chief priests and Sadducees will not join us. Our government, the Sanhedrin, is corrupt, and it can be no help to us at all. We are going in it alone, and I am going to die in this battle. On this day, Jesus spoke plainly to his disciples about the events that will soon transpire. And even though it was plain language, clearly it was not plain enough. Because see, Peter didn't like it. Peter's like, wait a second, this isn't working. This isn't how you lead an army. You don't go in the beginning and say, I'm planning on dying in this battle. That's a terrible, terrible military strategy. Look at any famous speech given by any famous leaders. I remember even William Wallace, he never claimed that he was going to die. He said, you guys may die. He said, it may take your life, but they'll not take our freedom kind of thing. But to go from the beginning and speak plainly and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to rush in there and get killed. In fact, oftentimes, the leaders stay back to ensure their safety. Jesus spoke plainly, but it wasn't plainly enough. Peter was not able to shake his understanding of Jesus as his general, so he pulls Jesus aside. He says, sir, this is not a very good military strategy. You are not going to die. Don't say that. It's not good for morale. We're going to be there with you, and we will fight till the end, and we will overthrow these godless Romans and get them out of Israel. You will ascend to the throne in place of Herod, and we will bet your right hand and left hand as the new leaders of Palestine. This is a great plan, Jesus. You have the power to do this. We've seen this already. Make this happen. Now, it's fascinating to note that right before Jesus rebukes Peter, what's he do? He turns and he looks at the other disciples. And I'm sure Peter, as the ringleader, was kind of put up to this. They all huddled up and said, okay, someone's got to go talk to him. This is not working out. So the other disciples are kind of hanging out there waiting to see what Jesus' response is. Jesus turns and sees them. And he realizes that this just isn't Peter. This is all of them. This is his whole band of believers and followers. They put his trust in him because they expect a different outcome. So Jesus suddenly puts two and two together. Realizes the disciples have put Peter up to this. It's a perilous moment in the life of Christ. He must dispel this error from their minds and teach them the meaning of his mission. So he rejects Peter outright, calling him a tool of Satan, and says, you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of man. Now hear that again. Ponder that thought for a moment. Does our actions and our attitudes portray the mind of God, or does it betray the mind of men? How differently would we act if every action was held to this standard? You see, Jesus is up against a formidable foe that day. And in the end, this foe may possess more power than he does. The foe that Jesus is up against is not Peter. It's not the Sanhedrin or Pontius Pilate or even Rome. In fact, the formidable foe that Jesus is up against that day is not even Satan. Who is the enemy, the powerful enemy that Jesus is up against that day? Our quest for position and rank and status. To have our voice heard above the crowd. The desire to be right at any cost. The quest for self-assurance and self-reliance. You see, the most dangerous enemy of God is our love for ourselves. Lucifer thought himself to be equal to God before his fall. The serpent told Adam and Eve that they could be like God if they ate the forbidden fruit. In fact, they deserved to be like him. Why should he get all the fun? Jesus told us that if we could just love each other as much as we already love ourselves, it would trump any other law ever written. The most dangerous enemy of God is our love for ourselves. That day with his disciples, Jesus sees the enemy and he knows that he must address it. So he pulls his disciples together and brings them in front of a crowd. And in front of the crowd, he corrects the disciples' aspirations for privilege, rank, and power. And he gives them this simple little directive. He said, you must take up your cross and follow me. Think about that statement for a minute. That's a crazy thing to say. Why? I mean, we view this statement so much differently than they do. Take up your cross, bear your cross. To us, it's this kind of burden, this righteous thing that we do. The cross to us doesn't have nearly the meaning that it has to them. Or it has a different meaning. See, to us, the cross is glory. The cross is something which ensures our salvation. The cross is not viewed as negatively to us, certainly as it was viewed to them. See, the cross at their time was the cruelest form of punishment known to man. It was the very tool that Rome used to force them into submission. It was thoroughly hated, and it was considered, according to Scripture, a curse to be hung upon one. So what is Jesus thinking by saying to his disciples and to the crowd that day, take up this cruel tool of torture and carry it willingly? And that's how we're supposed to follow you? This morning I want us to ask ourselves a question. Why must we carry a cross? What does that mean? What does that statement mean, and why does Jesus make such a profound point of saying it? See, Jesus makes this bold statement, I think, to remind us that we are not the center of the universe, and that our suffering is part of our discipleship as Christians. It's part of our growing process. It is characteristics of great leaders to make demands upon their followers. When Winston Churchill became Prime Minister, he told the British people that he had nothing to offer them but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. The Italian freedom fighter Garibaldi told his followers that he offered them only hunger and death. See, these were demanding leaders, but nowhere near as demanding as Jesus. He was 1,000 times more demanding than them. He said, therefore, whoever does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Possessions can't stand between you and the Lord. In fact, Jesus went as far to say, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own mother and father, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, they can't be my disciples either. Even something as noble as the love of family, and as good and right as that is, cannot stand in the way of commitment to the kingdom of God. Laziness, fear, selfishness, family, nothing can stand between us and our call to discipleship. Jesus demands our obedience. Jesus is not some wishy-washy little fellow coming up to us, hat in hand, hoping to win our favor, softly saying, please, sir, may I have a word with you? He comes to us as the Lord of history, and he makes his demand, take up your cross and follow me. He comes as one to be obeyed. During the dark days of World War II, England had a great difficulty of keeping men in the coal mines. It was a thankless kind of job, totally lacking in any glory, but in an era where coal production was so vital to the nation's continuance, it was something that had to happen in order for the country to function, especially a country that was at war. But most men wanted to go to the military, something glorious, something that would give them more acceptance and recognition. But something was needed to motivate these men in the work that they were doing so that they would remain in the mines and keep the country functioning. With this in mind, Winston Churchill delivered a speech one day to thousands of coal miners, stressing to them the importance of their role in the war effort. And he did this by painting them a mental picture. He told them to picture the grand parade that would take place when VE Day came. First, he said, would come the sailors of the British Navy, the ones who had upheld the grand tradition of Trafalgar and the defeat of the Armada. Next in the parade, he said, would come the pilots of the Royal Air Force. They were the ones who, more than any other, had saved England from the dreaded German Luftwaffe. Next in the parade would come the Army, the ones who had stood tall at the crisis of Dunkirk. But last of all, he said, would come a long line of sweat-stained, soot-streaked men in miners' caps. And someone, he said, would cry from the crowd, and where were you during the critical days of the struggle? And then from 10,000 throats would come, we were deep in the earth with our faces to the coal. We were told that there were tears in the eyes of many of those soot-laden and weather-faced coal miners that day. See, they had been given a sense of their own self-worth by the very man at the top. Service doesn't always come with big fancy ribbons. And I think that will be forever true. It is often the humble acts of service that provide us with the deepest sense of joy and the most fulfilling satisfaction. Jesus said, "Those who are willing to lose their life for my sake shall find it." I am persuaded that true discipleship is found in the coal mines with our cross upon our back, doing the work day in and day out that God has called you to do. We must also carry our cross because we need to be reminded that there are others who suffer and that we fight for justice in the lives of others. In 1580, a Dutch Protestant leader named Klaas was arrested and condemned by the Catholic Church as a heretic, and eventually he was burned at the stake. When the tragedy was over, his dear wife took their small son by the hand and walked through the back streets of the town to the hill where their loved one had perished as a Christian martyr. At the place of the execution, the bereaved widow gathered up a few of the ashes, placed them in her satchel, and hung it around the boy's neck. And she said, "Son, I place these ashes on your heart and on the heart of every son of these Netherlands in all eternity. Whenever and wherever in this world there is an injustice or wrong committed, these ashes will beat on your heart, and you will speak out without fear, even the fear of death." See, all around us, there are wrongs that we must correct. The cross we carry is our reminder of that fact. It's a sad episode in the life of the church that Jesus' followers have been the perpetrators of some of the most horrific crimes, all while claiming it was God's will. Certainly we know these eras. Think of the Crusades, the Inquisition. But what about more subtle ways? Times when Christians have claimed or even celebrated natural disasters as God's punishment on cities or countries. Or all the times we've turned away from a friend or a loved one in need because of their choices or their decisions that they've made. Though it may take time, if we keep carrying the cross, we may learn that others suffer as we do. And sometimes even we ourselves are perpetrators of the hatred and violence of which others suffer. We must pick up the cross to remind us of the suffering of others. But most importantly, we must carry a cross to remind us that we are responsible in part for the cross that Jesus carried. See, this is vital. When Rembrandt painted his famous work of the crucifixion called The Three Crosses, which now hangs in the Louvre in Paris, he did something most unusual. Among the faces in the crowd beneath the cross, he painted himself. That was his way of saying that he could not envision the crucifixion without admitting that he had a participation in it. Unfortunately, there are some that will never see that. They identify with the Christ on the cross rather than the Rembrandt in the crowd. The old haunting Negro spiritual gives us the refrain, "Were you there when they crucified my Lord?" And the emphasis is on you. If we were to be perfectly honest, we would all have to answer, yes, I was there. Yes, I had a role in this. It's only when we come to the understanding that we can sing the last part of the hymn. Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Some would respond by saying, "Well, that happened a long time ago, right? It has nothing to do with me. It was an act committed by pompous Romans and self-righteous Jews. I was not there," you might say. And that is that. I refuse to feel guilty for something that I had nothing to do with. Well, if that was the position we take, then I think we're missing the point of Jesus' words. What did he say? He said, "Take up your cross and follow me." Jesus does not simply want us to remember his cross as something he suffered on our behalf. If he did, he would just simply say, "Take up my cross. Be a part of my story." Instead, he tells us to take up our own cross. I think what he means is that he wants us to identify with the event of the crucifixion so much that we see ourselves in the story. It's not simply his story, but it's our story as well. I think it would be tragic if we go through this entire season of Lent and never fully understand our role in the crucifixion drama. You see, we are as much to blame as the people in Jerusalem that day. They may cry, "Crucify him," with their mouths, but today we say the same things oftentimes with our actions and our attitudes. They are no worse, and we are no better. All have sinned, right? And all have fallen short of the glory of God, from the Garden of Eden all the way to the very last person on earth. So why must we carry a cross? Well, to remind us that we must suffer for Christ's sake. That there are others in the world who suffer. And that ultimately we are responsible for the indignity and shame which Christ suffered upon the cross for each of us. You have a choice. You can either lay down the cross you've been given to bear and passively live your life with no challenges, or you can embrace it. You can pick it up. You can take it. Be transformed. Live for something greater than yourself. You see, in the end, it doesn't matter who can shout the loudest. It won't matter who tweets the most or posts the best argument. It doesn't matter if everyone believes the same way you do. All that matters is that we faithfully carried the burden of our cross and grew in humility and love for God and for our neighbors. Amen. Let's not waste this gift of salvation and forgiveness by thinking that we know better and that we deserve better. Let us remember who we really are and how we are called to love and serve others. Amen. Let's close with a video this morning.